Welcome back to Never Enough Novels. I am late to the party with this, but I still want to do a recap of every single book that I read in November so that I can share my ratings and quick reviews of all the books I read, whether they were good or not so great. I always like to share both my positive book reviews, ones that were so-so and ones that I downright hated, to help you figure out which book is best for you. Make sure you hit like on this video and subscribe to my channel to see more of my book recommendations in the future. I'll also put the links to all of these books on Amazon down below, so if you find any that catch your attention, you can grab those from Amazon and help support this channel at no extra cost to you. Normally I have at least some notes written up for each of my book reviews and recommendations, but we are just flying off the handle today and going in blind, so let's see what I can remember. Starting off is The Christmas Countdown by Holly Cassidy. This was one of the first Christmassy type romance books that I read of the season. It feels like ages ago at this point, but I really liked Holly Cassidy's previous novel, so I was excited to see what her new one for 2024 would be, and this was another hit from her. I ultimately gave it 4 stars, and it has an advent calendar theme, which I particularly love because I'm just a little bit obsessed with advent calendars. So I loved how that theme was woven through the entire book. Our main character, don't ask me her name, but her sister, she's just going through kind of a longer breakup, and her sister decides that she needs to get back in the holiday spirit. So her sister creates this advent calendar for the season where it's a mix of things that she has to do or little gifts that she gets to open to kind of encourage her along the way. She just happens to meet the local town baker who kind of needs some help with the business side of his operation. So he agrees to come on the outings for the advent calendar with her while she helps him with the business side of his company. So the two of them go on all these sort of adventures together and fall in love, and it just had that really cute Christmas romance, adorable feelings that we all love. But I really liked the addition of that advent calendar as a way to kind of set it apart from the other Christmas romances that I've read lately. The next book is Miranda in Retrograde by Lauren Lane. I ultimately gave this one 3.5 stars. I thought it was an okay romance, but it definitely wasn't my favorite of hers even, so that kind of dropped it down to 3.5 stars for me. Miranda is our main character, and she is an astrologist or something along those lines, but she decides after kind of a setback at work that she needs to take a little break from her profession, and she decides to let astrology set the tone for her next year. So she starts looking at her daily horoscope and basically following the guidance of her daily horoscope, kind of mapping her star charts and things like that to help dictate, what she does over the course of the next year. Along the way, she starts to get to know her neighbor, and he is kind of a typical grumpy, isolated person and pretty much scoffs at the idea of her letting the stars chart the course of her life. But she decides to kind of stick to her plan for the year as she knows it, and there's definitely a little bit of tension between the two of them over this decision and kind of the path of her future. So I thought the idea was unique, and I mean, astrology and astronomy are both pretty interesting, but ultimately it just fell a little flat in parts and felt like it dragged on a little bit, so that's why I decided to give it 3.5 stars. Then we have another Christmas romance. This was a very sweet and cozy Hallmark type novel. It's called The December Market by Rayanne Thane, and the main character owns her own small business. It's a little soap shop, and she helps run the Christmas market in her local town. And along the way, she starts to get to know one of the single dads in town who's also a firefighter, and after an incident, he ends up helping at the market over the course of the 2 weeks that it's running. So the two of them start to interact a lot, and we get a lot of scenes with his son, who is just adorable. I'm a sucker for any kind of single dad romance, or really any romance that has kids in it, because I just love them as side characters and the way that they interact with our main couple throughout the course of the book. So this one was cute. I really liked it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. The cover is also adorable and beautiful, so it's one of those that you're going to want to have on your shelves. Switching things up from my Christmas romances, I also listened to Two Can Play by Ali Hazelwood, and this is a novella or short story, and it's only available on audio, I'm pretty sure. So it's kind of a unique story from her. It's set in the video game design world, so as you know, Ali Hazelwood always has some sort of STEM association in her books. So I thought this was kind of a unique take on that, since it's still very nerdy, but it's set in the video game design world. So our two main characters are two video game designers who work for rival studios, and those two studios are being forced to spend the holidays together. I guess this one does take place during the holidays, so it kind of fits into that Christmas romance, but I swear it's not the main theme of the book. So if you're looking for a break, this would be a good option. But they're basically forced to spend like a weekend together at this corporate retreat to kind of get to know each other because they do not get along, but they both want to design this new game that's coming out. So this is a test to see if the employees can get along so they can build like the best video game possible. So our two main characters are particular rivals, and over the course of the weekend, you kind of find out more about what has happened with them in the past versus where they're at in the current state. And there was a lot of like nerdy references and video game touches, but this was just another solid romance from Allie. I can rely on her for pretty much everything that she writes, and I really like this one as well, so I gave this one 4 stars. Switching to a thriller, the only one that I read this past month was You Can Never Be Me by Jessie Q. Sutano. And I picked this one up because it has a social media aspect. So our two main female characters are social media influencers, specifically in like the momfluencer world. The one kind of got into the business first and found the other one and kind of helped her along and showed her the ropes. And then the second one became bigger ultimately and had a much bigger presence and following and was being sought out by a lot more brands. So there was an intense level of like jealousy and competition that ran through the entire book. Ultimately, someone was murdered, and like there was this whole thread of how this sort of scenario plays out online and what people present in their social media presences versus like what actually goes on in their real lives. So it was for sure a peek behind the scenes of what an influencer's life can really look like. And that part was really interesting, but there were some kind of strange things and like very unrealistic things that happened as well. So I gave this one 3.5 stars. I feel like as I'm thinking back on it, I enjoyed it more than thought I did at the time. So like I might bump it up to 4 stars kind of looking back. But it was definitely a unique thriller. It was a lot of fun to read about the friendship of these two women that just went downhill so fast and what they did to kind of sabotage each other or, ultimately like get to the head of the pack in this sort of cutthroat business. Then we have Under Lock and Key by Lana Ferguson. This is a monster romance featuring the Loch Ness Monster. It is set in Scotland when our main character, Kiana, or Key, travels to the country to meet her grandparents. So her father has recently died, and for her entire life, they've been estranged from her grandparents. So this is her first time meeting them, and she just kind of shows up on their doorstep and was like, hey, I'm your granddaughter, let's fix things. So she decides to kind of stay on for a while. Her grandfather is very excited. Her grandmother is not so much. So there's a weird family dynamic there as she tries to understand what happened that caused the rift between her dad and her grandparents all these years ago, but she wants to learn more about her family history. And there is a man named Lachlan who works for her grandparents' farm, and he's got some secrets of his own that he is hiding, and they definitely get off to a bad start. There is an intense kind of enemies to lovers vibe that's going on here, but once she uncovers his secret, she realized that she might be able to help him kind of figure out the key to unlocking this kind of curse that's taken over his family. And you find out more about how both of their families have interacted over generations. And there's a little bit of magic from Kiana's side as well, which was a really interesting touch. This is a Lana Ferguson romance, so it does get super steamy. Plus, you've got like that little bit of monster aspect that shows up in the spicy scenes as well. And honestly, like I devoured it. It was so fun to read. And this was another really great romance from her. It definitely had that little bit of magical element. Plus, I adore anything set in Scotland. And there was a lot of like Scottish history and involvement with the land and like beautiful descriptions of where they were at that really like took the novel up another notch. So I ultimately gave this 4 stars. It was definitely like a really fun, slightly different romance. Then I have another favorite author who is Lynn Painter, and I read her book Nothing Like the Movies, which is the sequel to one of her young adult romances, Better Than the Movies. So it picks up where we left off with Wes and Liz after they are in college now. So something happened that broke the two of them up after we got the happy ending and Better Than the Movies, but they are now split up and Wes wants to win Liz back. So after some things that happened with his family, he is now back in college, goes to the same college as Liz, playing baseball again, and he is determined to right his wrongs and get Liz back. But she has moved on. It has now been 2 years since that event, and she is having none of his shenanigans. So the whole book it's got very similar vibes to Better Than the Movies. And I feel like Lynn Painter just does such a good job writing like realistic, nostalgic, young love, like college age love. And I felt like I was right there with them, experiencing the same kind of college antics as they were. It's really fun to see Wes try and win Liz over and kind of get to know this new version of her, since she has obviously grown and matured since he last like knew her well also. Plus, since he's part of the baseball team and Liz is covering the baseball team as a journalist, there is a ton of kind of sports interactions and interactions with his team that are really funny. And I just think she does a great job of balancing kind of like the immaturity of college that doesn't really show up too much with just having enough bit of fun in there to make it like a really lighthearted book. So this was another really solid romance from her. I gave this one 4 stars as well. The one fantasy I read this month was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. So this series has gotten a lot of attention. It's another very typical like romantasy book that you'll hear recommended. This one is set in the world of vampires. So it's unique from that aspect because we're not just looking at like fae or dragons or something like that. It's got vampires everywhere. So the main character, well, geez, I don't remember her name, but she was taken in by like the king of the vampires when she was really little and raised as a human amongst this world of vampires. So humans and vampires do live together, but humans are clearly like second level citizens. They're constantly preyed on by the vampires. So she's basically in danger her entire life. But her father, obviously, since he is like the current king of the vampires, he's protected her and taught her how to protect herself as well. So she decides to enter this tournament that honors the vampire's like main goddess. And the winner of the tournament is granted one wish of pretty much anything. So her entire goal of winning this tournament is to basically be turned into a vampire herself so she can become like the second in command for her father. And as she goes through this tournament, she meets another rival vampire from like the rival clan and kind of ends up teaming up with him and his friend in a bit of a shocking twist. Like she finds out that all the things she kind of thought she knew about this rival clan of vampires aren't necessarily true, and she learns something about her father that she doesn't necessarily love. Obviously, the vampire that she's teamed up with, there's definitely sparks flying between them as well. So she's torn between loyalty to her father or this newfound like possibility at love with this vampire that she isn't supposed to fall in love with. And throughout the book, they are going through the levels of the tournament together, ultimately knowing that like only one of them can win. There is literally everyone else like must die for the one person to win and get the wish granted by the goddess. I think I had too high of hopes for this one. It was very intriguing and fast-paced at times, but it also wasn't a book that I constantly picked up and wanted to keep reading. Whereas so many other like romantasy and fantasy books feel like they just consume my time and my life, and I am living in this world and don't ever want to leave. But I didn't get those same feelings from this one. So at this point, I'm not sure if I'm going to continue on with this series. I might just to see where it goes, but out of all the other, romantasy books that I've read recently, this one was lower on my list. So I gave it 3.5 stars. Like, it's definitely still an interesting book, and I really like the vampire aspect because it is different than other fantasy books that are out there right now. But I just feel like in terms of all-consuming interest and wanting to live as a part of this world and getting to know these characters and rooting for them, it just didn't pull me in the same way that some other books have. The last book I'm going to share was actually my favorite romance of the month. This is Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage. This is the 3rd book in her Rebel Blue Ranch series. So we are headed back to the ranch and this family of brothers and sisters that I just adore so much at this point. This time we're focusing on Gus, who is one of the brothers who works at the ranch, and Teddy, who is best friends with the brother's sister. So both of these characters have been in the series already, so we're kind of familiar with them, but we finally get a chance to focus on them and their blossoming relationship. When the book starts, they absolutely detest each other, and everyone knows that Teddy and Gus are like mortal enemies. So you've got that dynamic right off the bat that has already been shown through the rest of the series, but you obviously know this is a romance, so it's exciting to see how things change for them. And the way that starts is that Gus needs help with his daughter for the summer. The only person who's really available is Teddy, so she kind of becomes a part of their life over the course of the summer and really gets to know his daughter and him as they start to spend more time together. Before this, they've never had like a really true conversation because they're just constantly sniping at each other or making barbs. So it gives them an opportunity to be honest and open up and realize that they have a lot more in common and they understand each other a lot better than they ever expected. This also was a bit of a slow burn. So obviously they're starting out as like hardcore enemies. So you knew it was going to take a while anyway for them to get to romantic feelings. But I felt like the book didn't rush it, which I really appreciated. And it felt so much more invested in the relationship because it developed slowly at a natural pace over time. They had these conversations together. They started going on little adventures together. And throughout the book, they really showed up for each other, which I thought was the best part, was just their relationship developed through actions of little things that Gus would do, or being there for Teddy, or Teddy giving Gus space to not always be needed and relied on and have someone take care of him for once. So these two were just, I don't know if they're my favorite because I felt like every couple in this series has been my favorite, but I really appreciated the way that their romance developed and how things changed from enemies to friends and then ultimately, sparks and something more. Plus, obviously, Gus's daughter is a big part of this, and Teddy and her relationship was so fun to read about as well because she truly developed a bond with her and they became this little tight-knit family that was just so satisfying and so adorable to read. Okay, that was my quick recap of everything that I read in November. So hopefully you found some books that you're interested in. I know I had some good ones, some okay ones. I've already started off December with a few excellent books, so I will be extra excited to share those next month. So stay tuned. Like I said, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you see all of my future book recommendations.